Hi, I'm Dr. Stephanie Akau. I'm a senior archivist here at the Music Division at the Library of Congress, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Carl Testa, who's the archives manager at the Tricentric Foundation. Carl, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we're very pleased to have you and your ensemble here as well to perform Anthony Braxton's music.
That's Tricentric Foundation Ensemble.
That's right, yeah. Carl, since you're the archives manager, can you tell me a little bit about the history of the archive at Tricentric?
Sure. The archive really started in probably 2013 when Anthony Braxton retired from his teaching position as a professor at Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut. So I myself and other folks like Amy Crawford and Taylor Hobynum picked up the scores from his office and his rehearsal room and took them to my living room. And the archive for 2 years pretty much lived in our den. And it wasn't until 2015 that we were able to actually get a space where we could start to really organize the materials and start the process of scanning and making the pieces available for others to see and perform. And 2015, we were able to get a dedicated space for the archive, and that's when the real kind of scanning process began. And we started, I think, in 2016, making the pieces available for people to purchase and access to encourage more and more people to be able to perform this music. Because for so many years it was only the people who had direct access to Braxton who were able to get scores. So this was a big step to make his music more accessible.
Yeah, wow, your living room. That's 60 years worth of music in your living room. Wow.
Yeah, it was very nerve-wracking.
Well, we're really pleased that you guys then decided to Anthony to bring the archive to the Library of Congress, and it's now fully processed, and the finding aid is about to go online. So it's really exciting. So people will be able to come here and study scores and parts. And so let's talk a little bit about what is here then at the library now. Let's start early with composition number 8, which is a piece from the 1960s. Can you tell me more about that?
Sure. So composition number 8 is an example of his music for solo saxophone. And it is a piece that incorporates both graphic elements and some traditionally notated elements. It's the first pieces that started what became the language music, where the language music is Braxton's way of categorizing sound into different categories so that you can then use it for improvisation or composition or any kind of musical situation. So he would use it for, as a solo instrumentalist, he would write pieces for chamber music, focusing on a particular language music. It can also be a way of conducting an ensemble. In a lot of performances, you might see him give a circle and then a number, and that means language music 1, and that would cue the ensemble to play a particular type of sound. Yeah.
Creative orchestra or creative ensemble is an ensemble that Braxton wrote for quite regularly. A good example is the composition 147, that's the score, and the parts of which are in the collection. This is for 3 solo clarinetists with instrument ensemble. So can you tell me a little bit more about that piece? I'm a clarinetist, so I'm very interested in this one.
Yes, excellent. I love the clarinet. Braxton is an amazing clarinetist, in addition to saxophonist and composer. Composition 147 was originally written for the Ensemble Moderne as a commission, and it features notated music with parts interspersed for these solo clarinetists. And the solo clarinetists are performing notated materials and improvising within Braxton's language music structure, but then they're also given materials in the section BB pages, which are source materials that they are to derive their improvisations from. So this is like kind of a big metaphor that Braxton uses is like a sonic erector set. You know, his music is a toolbox with you can draw from as a creative musician and construct what you're going to perform. Mm-hmm. So the 147 and the solo clarinetist is a clear example of this, where they can take that material, assemble it into how they want to use it during performance, and it can be different each time. Mm-hmm. So it highlights the fact that he gives his performers a lot of creative agency in the way they approach the music. And this is why I feel that to be a performer in his ensemble is to also be a composer as well. Mm-hmm. We're all composing, helping to compose the music in real time.
I've heard his music described as democratic. Would you agree with that characterization from having performed in these sort of ensembles?
I think it does have democratic elements, but it is, in his words, multi-hierarchical. So there's different layers of command, and those different layers can be activated at different points. So you may have, a group of 3 as a section, mm-hmm. and then they're part of a larger group, and then there's another group above that, and they can all be activated at different times. But it also doesn't mean that the person who's only in a section, they could take, say, with this group of musicians, I want to start playing this piece. There's enough agency there that sort of the point of activation or change in the ensemble can come from any direction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that in relation to his ghost trance music that would come a little bit later?
Yeah. So it's readily apparent in his ghost trance music. It started in the mid-90s with, for Braxton, radically simple notation, simple music, where everyone is performing unison eighth notes, a steady stream of eighth notes. He described it as a melody that doesn't begin and doesn't end. And an interesting connection for the ghost trance music to the language music is that ghost trance music is connected to language music 1, long sound. Mm-hmm. It's initially sort of maybe confounding that would be language music 1 because it's not a drone. It's these eighth notes that are repeating, but it's more the kind of the concept of a melody that doesn't begin and doesn't end that is connected to the long sound. And so he would continue to develop that into different, what he called species. Second species added rhythmic abruptions. Third species added additional graphic elements. And then the accelerator class music added lots of color, graphics, and a performance practice that really demonstrated that way of all the musicians being able to contribute to the direction that the music goes, where different ensembles are splitting off, playing different pieces, exploring different aspects of the system as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Now, a really interesting part, I think, of the accelerator ghost trance music is that when you look at the primary melody material, their note heads and the rhythms in some way look very similar to what you would see in traditional notation, but they're colored, and there's a legend that has each color. Can you talk about how you use that in a performance or what it means to a performer?
Sure. Well, if we go back to looking at composition number 8, there's defined pitch and undefined pitch. And I think it's very important for Braxton to always have some kind of unknown element, something that is undefined in the music, to kind of keep that surprise possibility. And for the colors, it does give a code, but it also kind of leaves things open for interpretation. And during some of the initial performances of those pieces, it would be something that the ensemble would want to try. Hey, why don't we do a color hocket? You know, you play blue, I'll play green, you play yellow, and just try different ways of utilizing the colors as a way of changing the interpretation of the piece.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. All right. Well, speaking of color, I think Falling River music, the second you look at a score for a piece of Falling River music pieces, you notice that some of them are very colorful and some of them utilize paint as well. And this seems to be very open to interpretation. So can you talk a little bit about his compositional system of Falling River music?
Sure. Falling River music started in the early 2000s and initially was on 8.5 by 11 size sheets, mostly with markers. And then later on, he introduced the second species, which incorporates these broader brush strokes. And the way that my engagement with these pieces has been is very much with this sense of moving between intuition of my response to the colors to then kind of moving into an analytical mode of decoding the music in real time. And that's an important aspect of this music, where there are numbers and there are symbols, and the symbols do have definitions in his 100 sound classifications sheet, but they're also open to kind of real-time decoding. So you may see a 7, and you may see some symbols, and connect that to the language music and play a short attack 3 times or things like that. And it's really great as an improviser to play those pieces because you can have this intuitive sense of the brushstrokes of moving non-linearly through this composition, and then come to another point where you may take a break and then come back into the music with a new take on what has been happening.
How do you know when a piece like that is over?
Good question. Yeah, it's open. A lot of his music can have any duration, but for practical purposes, when Braxton would be performing with his ensemble, he would use an hourglass to denote the start of the performance. And once the sand in the glass was empty, musicians knew it was time to stop.
All right.
But it can be, it can be any length that it needs to be. I think that's an important part, that he's open to the needs of the friendly experiencers for that music to last however long it needs to.
Okay. All right. And does the audience are they watching the hourglass as well? Is that something that they're able to see?
Yeah, they're usually able to see it as well. Yeah.
All right. Wow. So you mentioned the term friendly experiencer. Can you elaborate on that and Mr.
Sure.
Braxton's interpretation of that?
So friendly experiencer is a term that he uses that usually refers to the audience as invitation for people to come to the concert and experience the music, but it really is more expansive than just the audience. It also includes the musicians performing and the composer himself, because everyone is experiencing this entity of the musical system that he's been creating for over 50 years.
It sort of breaks that fourth wall between like the musicians or the performers and the audience, is what it sounds like.
Yeah. Like it's a great way of inviting everyone into the process of experiencing the music, even if you've never heard it before, you have no idea what is going on. You can just kind of come in and see what's happening, and the musicians, the audience, the composer, everyone's at the same level, experiencing the music together.
It seems to invite an open-mindedness too about audience members who haven't experienced Anthony's music before. Would you agree?
Yeah, I really think so. And and imparts this this positivity that I think comes through Braxton's music all the way.
Okay. All right. Before we talk about Trillium, because I definitely want to talk about Trillium, can we backtrack a little bit and talk about Composition 173? Because this is a composition where he uses actors, but it's not on the same scale as an opera. So can you talk about that piece?
Yes, Composition 173 is a piece for four actors, ensemble and constructed environment. And this piece is notable in the way it was composed and the way it's represented in the collection, because we have the initial draft of the piece, which he wrote out for 5 instruments and unison sections of music. So there'd be blank material and then a section of unison and then more blank material. And he made a copy of that and then went back and then filled in the other parts so that you would have this mixture of the music diverging and then suddenly coming together, locking into place. And in 173, the actors are talking about a story, or they're enacting a story where they're mapping a space, and they're hearing sounds coming from different directions and using their voices to activate sounds that would lead them into different areas. And so Braxton's really kind of, at this period, use his music as a way of mapping spaces and demonstrating what he would call navigation through form, which is kind of really just the process of performing and often listening to his music.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, we started with a solo piece, so now we're going to go all the way to like a more recent and just large scale, basically as large as you can get, I think, in music. So can you tell me a little bit about the Trillium Opera Complex? We have one example from Trillium L, but I think it's important for people to know what the concept behind this opera complex is. That is massive.
Yes, it is massive, and I'm not sure I can even do it justice because it is so large. Trillium L is the 7th of the lettered opera compositions. Trillium A is a single act, but Trillium L is 5 acts. And in Braxton's music system, there are 12 characters, Shala, Helena, Zacco, and they aren't unified characters from one act to another. In Trillium A, Shala could be a villain, but in Trillium L, she could be a hero. Mm-hmm. And each of the acts of each opera are autonomous. So they're grouped together, but they could technically be separated and performed in different configurations. And all of the opera story derive from schematics from his triaxiom writings. And these are his 3-volume philosophical writings that he wrote from the late 70s to the mid 80s. And all of the Trillium stories kind of derive from one of the arguments or one of the ideas that he was presenting in the triaxiom writings.
But these operas all take place not necessarily within like a certain historical time, but each act sort of has its own setting. Like I know some take place in outer space, others don't. Can you describe some of these settings that the operas happen in?
Sure, yeah. Wow, I mean, there's really a vast array of opera settings. Braxton is a big fan of sci-fi and horror movies, so there's a lot of haunted mansions, there's the Wild West, outer space, clones, just about every kind of narrative situation that you could imagine. Braxton is interested in. There's plenty about the end of the world.
Mm-hmm. Every Trillium opera, even though there's not really like any heavy plot, the characters are the same, but the structure of each act is also the same. Is that correct?
Well, the structure of each sort of opera as a whole is the same, where before the performance begins, Braxton would have what he calls centurions circling the performance space, playing a melody, a repeating melody, and this just kind of prepares the space, gets the musicians, gets everyone ready for the performance. And then the centurions come into the performance space as continuing to play the melody, and then hand off the melody to the orchestra, which then repeats it again. And then once the orchestra has fully performed that melody, which is really a signature for each Trillium opera, then the curtain opens and the piece begins.
How many acts are left in Trillium? Do you know?
We should know. We could figure it out. So Trillium is a 36 autonomous one acts, and A is 1, M is, I think I can remember,
Dialogues
it's
are
2,
yeah.
2, R is 4, so we're at 7, and then E is 4, 11,
L is-
J is
okay.
J is 4, so that's 15, and X is 4, so that's 19, and L is 5, so that's 24.
Okay.
So we have 12 left.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah. Oh.
All right.
So we cut it. So there's 12. So I think there's 12 acts left in the total cycle, and it's amazing to think of the amount of effort that goes into writing these operas, because for the most part, Anthony has spent 7 years on Trillium L, on Trillium X, because it is such an intense process of writing the libretto, getting the libretto on the page. He writes it all down, and then he goes back and then writes out the strings, and goes back, writes out the woodwinds, the brass, solo instrumentalists. So it's this process of going back and layering all the material, and for one act of Trillium L, Act 3 is actually for 2 orchestras,
Right.
mirrored orchestras. So 12 solo instrumentalists in each half, 12 vocalists in each half, and it's a really massive conceptual and physical undertaking. Yeah. And the pages are 2 feet wide, 3 to 4 feet long. It's really a massive work, and I can't think of many composers that take their work so seriously that they dedicate 7 years
Yeah.
to one piece.
Yeah.
And it's really impressive.
Yeah. I wish we could talk for hours about Mr. Braxton's music, but I need to let you get back to rehearsal. And we look forward to the concert. And Carl, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.